In the distant reaches of the galaxy, a peaceful alien race known as the Estherans found themselves in a crisis no one could have predicted. The Estherans had lived for centuries in harmony, focusing on the betterment of their people and their vast knowledge of the universe. They were known for their wisdom and had always maintained strong diplomatic ties with other galactic civilizations. But when the Zorath, a ruthless and war-hungry empire, set their eyes on the Estherans' lush homeworld, everything changed. The Zorath were feared across the stars. Their fleet was massive, their technology far more advanced than many other species. They had no mercy for those they deemed weaker, and they considered the peaceful Estherans to be an easy target. One by one, the Estherans sent desperate calls for help to their neighbors, hoping someone would come to their aid. Yet, despite their vast alliances, the galaxy turned its back on them. The Galactic Council, a group made up of powerful species from across the universe, decided not to intervene. They argued that the Estherans' conflict with the Zorath was a local matter, and that it would be too risky to engage with the Empire. Some even suggested that the Estherans had been too trusting, and now they must face the consequences. The Council's decision was cold and heartless. As each request for help was denied, the Estherans grew more desperate, knowing that their survival depended on finding an unlikely ally. Across the galaxy, on a small planet called Earth, a group of human explorers were embarking on a routine mission. They were part of a newly formed space program, representing one of the youngest and most ambitious species in the galaxy. The humans had only recently become aware of the broader universe beyond their own solar system. They had sent out exploratory ships, hoping to make new discoveries, but they were still far from being an influential force in galactic affairs. While charting unknown sectors of space, a small team of human explorers stumbled upon a strange transmission. It was weak, filled with static and distortion, but the message was clear enough for them to understand. It was from the Estherans. They spoke of a great invasion by the Zorath and begged for assistance. The explorers, stunned by the desperate plea, quickly passed the message back to Earth's Space Command. At first, Earth's leaders were unsure how to react. Many dismissed the message as a mistake, a random transmission from a race they had never heard of. But for some reason, something about the message struck a chord. The desperation in the Estherans' voices was undeniable, and the humans knew that if they ignored it, they might regret it forever. The Estherans were asking for help, and for the first time, the humans were faced with a choice: stand by and do nothing, or try to make a difference in the galaxy. The decision wasn't easy. The human leaders knew they were not prepared for a war with the Zorath. They had no grand fleets or powerful weapons. They were still learning how to survive in space, let alone fight a powerful empire. But the more they thought about it, the more they realized that this wasn't just about military strength. It was about doing what was right. A meeting was called with military officials, scientists, and diplomats. The room was filled with tension, as everyone had a different opinion. Some argued that humanity should focus on its own development, not risk everything for a distant race. Others believed that if they didn't act, they would forever live with the guilt of knowing they could have helped but chose not to. After hours of debate, it was decided. Humanity would intervene. The plan was simple. A fleet of human ships would be sent to this Theran homeworld to help defend it against the Zorath. They knew it would be a dangerous mission. The Zorath were far more powerful, and their fleet was much larger. But the humans had something the Zorath didn't: determination. They had a fierce will to protect the innocent and stand up for what was right, even if it meant standing against a much stronger foe. The world watched in silence as the first human fleet was prepared. The ships, though small and far less advanced than those of the galactic powers, were equipped with the best technology humanity had to offer. These were not warships, but they were fast, agile, and designed with human creativity in mind. Every engineer, scientist, and soldier worked tirelessly to get them ready for the journey ahead. As the fleet finally lifted off, heading into the unknown depths of space, a sense of unity washed over the planet. The people of Earth had made a choice, and they were not going to back down. They had heard the cries of those in need, and now they were going to stand by their side, no matter the cost. With urgency in her movements, Reyes and her team began working on the new plan. The crew was scrambling to reconfigure their weapons to target the Zorath ship's energy shields. They knew that every second counted. If they failed to disable the Dreadnought's shield, it would wipe out everything in its path, including the human fleet. Outside the ship, the Zorath Dreadnought loomed larger, its weapons charging for a direct hit. The Hope's horizon veered to the side, narrowly avoiding a blast that would have torn it apart. In the chaos of the moment, the human ships continued to fire, trying to keep the Zorath forces distracted while Reyes worked on her plan. "We're almost there," Reyes called out, sweat dripping down her face. "I've rerouted the power to the main cannon. The shield's about to overload." General Miller's heart raced as she watched the enemy dreadnought. It was an enormous ship, but it was only as strong as its shield. If Reyes could pull this off, it would level the playing field. The countdown began. Raya's voice rang through the comms as the ship's weapons prepared to fire. "Ready? Now." With a flash of light, the Hope's horizon unleashed its most powerful shot yet. The beam of energy shot through space, directly striking the Zorath Dreadnought's shield. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the shield flickered. Then it collapsed. The Zorath ship was exposed. "Now, everyone, fire." Miller barked, her command cutting through the tension. The human fleet surged forward, every ship targeting the now vulnerable dreadnought. The crew of the Hope's Horizon fired every weapon they had at their disposal, from plasma cannons to torpedoes, aiming for the now unprotected core of the ship. The Zorath dreadnought exploded in a brilliant flash, sending shockwaves through space. It was a victory, but the battle wasn't over yet. The remaining Zorath ships regrouped, but the tide had started to turn. On the bridge, the crew let out a collective breath. General Miller allowed herself a brief moment of relief before turning to face her officers. "That's just one ship. We've still got more work to do." Dr. Reyes wiped her brow, relieved but focused. "It worked, but we've only got one chance to keep this up. The Zorath won't take it lightly." The crew, however, was no longer filled with uncertainty. They had found a weakness, and they knew they could exploit it. For the first time since the battle began, the humans saw a glimmer of hope. They weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. The Zorath fleet had underestimated humanity's resourcefulness, and now they were about to learn that humans would never back down, no matter the odds. The battle was far from over, but the humans had proven they had the strength and determination to face whatever came next. The explosion of the Zorath dreadnought sent shockwaves through the battlefield, but it wasn't the end. The enemy fleet, though shaken by the loss of their largest ship, quickly regrouped and retaliated with even more ferocity. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, but they were not going to make that mistake again. On the bridge of the Hope's Horizon, General Miller's eyes were sharp, focused. The crew had proven their strength, but the war was far from over. The Zorath still had plenty of firepower, and the human fleet, though resilient, was beginning to show signs of wear. The battle was taking a toll on them all. "Status report," Miller ordered, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the bridge. The officer at the communications station quickly turned to face her. "We've lost 2 more ships, General. The Zorath reinforcements are relentless. Their firepower is overwhelming." Miller's jaw tightened. The loss of 2 ships was a blow, but they could still fight. "We need to hold them off. Keep moving. No one gets left behind." The officers nodded, and the crew went back to work, each one knowing the importance of their role. The fleet was still operating at full capacity, but they were running out of time. The Zorath had numbers, and the human ships were small and less heavily armed. It was a battle of endurance, and the longer it dragged on, the more dangerous it became. On the lower decks, Dr. Emily Reyes and her team of scientists were hard at work, trying to find a way to break the Zorath's advantage. They had studied their weapons, their tactics, everything they could get their hands on, but they were still struggling to find a definitive weakness. "How's the analysis going?" Dr. Rice asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion as she approached her lead scientist, Dr. Ethan Shaw. "This is our moment," Miller said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "We've shown the galaxy what we're capable of. Now, we finish what we started." As the final Zorath ships fell, their massive fleet crumbling before the power of humanity's resolve, General Miller knew that the war was far from over. But something had shifted. The galaxy that had once turned its back on humanity was now watching, wondering just what humanity would do next. And humanity had just shown them that they would fight, no matter the odds, no matter the enemy. The universe had underestimated humanity once. It would not make that mistake again. As the Hope's horizon flew through the stars, General Miller looked out at the vastness of space. There was still much to be done, but humanity had earned its place. The fight was far from over, but humanity was ready. In the darkness of space, a new hope had been born, and it was humanity's. In the days that followed, the fleet began to take shape. Human engineers worked around the clock, combining the latest technology with innovative designs to create a fleet capable of facing an enemy far more powerful than they had ever encountered. The ships were smaller than the massive Zorath warships, but they were fast, flexible, and equipped with experimental weaponry. As the countdown to launch began, General Miller addressed the crew of the fleet, a group of men and women from all nations of Earth. "We may not be the largest force in the galaxy, but we are the bravest. We're doing this not because we have to, but because it's the right thing to do. Together, we will show the galaxy that humanity's strength isn't measured by the size of our ships, but by the size of our hearts." The fleet was ready, and Earth's decision was final. There was no turning back now. They were heading into a war that could change the course of the galaxy forever, but humanity stood united. They had chosen to act, and they would not let this Therans face destruction alone. The fight for justice was about to begin, and humanity was ready to make its mark on the stars. The human fleet drifted silently through the vastness of space, leaving behind the familiar comforts of Earth. There was a mix of emotions among the crew: nervousness, excitement, fear, and determination. The journey to this Theran homeworld was long, and the unknown stretched out before them like a dark ocean. But they were not alone. They had each other, and their mission was clear: help this Therans defend their world from the Zorath. General Alexandra Miller stood at the bridge of the flagship, the Hope's Horizon. The ship was sleek and modern, a blend of human creativity and advanced technology. Though it was no match for the warships of the Zorath, it was fast and maneuverable, and that would be their greatest strength. The fleet consisted of several ships, each smaller, but built with precision. The human fleet had no heavy artillery or overwhelming numbers, but they had a strong will to fight and an unshakable belief in their cause. As they traveled through deep space, the crew worked tirelessly to prepare for what lay ahead. Officers reviewed their strategies, engineers double-checked every system, and medical personnel kept everyone in good health, aware that the challenges they would face would test them all. The scientists on board continued studying the Zorath and their tactics, trying to find any weakness they could exploit. They didn't have much to go on, just fragmented reports from the Therans and limited knowledge about the enemy, but they were determined to make it work. In the mess hall, a young officer named Leo sat across from Dr. Emily Rice, the scientist who had been instrumental in deciphering this Therans transmission. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Leo couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He had never been this far from Earth before, and now he was about to be part of a mission that could decide the fate of an entire species. The thought made him uneasy, but there was no turning back. "How do you think it'll go?" Leo asked, looking at Dr. Reyes. She smiled softly, a mix of excitement and worry in her eyes. "I don't know. The Zorath are a powerful enemy, and we're still learning about them. But we're doing this for a reason. We can't just watch and do nothing. The Therans are counting on us. Leo nodded, though the doubt still lingered. It's hard to believe that the entire galaxy just turned their backs on them. Dr. Ray sighed. I know, but that's the truth. The galaxy's been playing politics while the Therans are fighting for their lives. We're the ones who have to step up, even if it's dangerous. The conversation paused as a low hum echoed through the ship. It was a signal that they were nearing the Theran system. The crew on the bridge sprang into action, preparing for their arrival. It was now or never. General Miller's voice broke the silence. All crew, prepare for arrival. We are entering Theran space. Let's make sure we're ready. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched out before them. And in the distance, a small but beautiful world began to take shape. It was green and blue, with sprawling oceans and vast forests. Just like Earth, only more peaceful. The Theran homeworld. And yet, it was a world on the brink of disaster. The fleet entered the system, passing through asteroid belts and nebulae, guided by the Theran's coordinates. As they approached the planet, the first signs of trouble became visible. The sky was filled with distant flashes of light. An ongoing battle. The Zorath fleet was already here, and they were not holding back. On the bridge, the crew's tension grew palpable. We've arrived, General Miller said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Prepare for battle. We're almost there, Dr. Shaw replied, looking over the data on his screen. We've noticed a pattern in their shields. There's a weak point in the left flank of their ships, but it's only exposed for a few seconds when they charge their weapons. If we can time it right, we might be able to hit them with a direct strike. Reyes nodded, her mind racing. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. She quickly relayed the information to General Miller, who wasted no time in organizing the next phase of the battle. We've got a weakness, Miller announced on the bridge. The Zorath ships have a gap in their shields. It only lasts a few seconds, but if we strike at the right time, we can take out their smaller ships one by one. The crew looked at each other, a renewed sense of determination filling the room. It was a slim chance, but it was a chance nonetheless. With the Zorath ships closing in, the humans had no choice but to take that chance. We'll divide the fleet into two groups, Miller continued. One will engage the Zorath head-on, drawing their fire. The other will move into position to hit their weak spots. This is a high-risk move, but it's the only option we've got. The officers immediately went to work, relaying the orders to the fleet. The human ships split into two groups, one moving toward the main Zorath forces, and the other flanking their right side. The tension on the bridge was palpable as the plan began to take shape. The two groups of human ships moved into position, dodging and weaving through the chaos of the battle. The Zorath responded quickly, trying to catch them in the open, but the humans were quick and nimble. It was like a dance, a deadly one, between the two fleets, each one trying to outmaneuver the other. As the humans closed in on the Zorath ships, the moment of truth arrived. The Zorath ships began to charge their weapons, their energy shields flickering as they gathered power. General Miller watched with a steely gaze, knowing that the next few seconds would determine the outcome of this phase of the battle. Now, she shouted. The human fleet fired simultaneously, each ship targeting the weak spot in the Zorath shields. The energy blasts hit their mark, and for a brief moment, the Zorath ships were exposed. The human fleet didn't hesitate. They fired everything they had: plasma cannons, missiles, and energy beams. The impact was devastating. One of the smaller Zorath ships erupted in a burst of flames, followed by another. It was working. The plan was working. Keep it up, Miller ordered. We're not done yet. The Zorath fleet began to falter. Their ships, once untouchable, were now vulnerable. The human fleet moved in with precision, picking off smaller Zorath ships one by one. The Zorath forces began to retreat, slowly at first, but with increasing speed as their numbers dwindled. The humans had gained the upper hand. On the lower decks, Dr. Rice allowed herself a brief smile of relief. They had done it. For now. The tide of the battle had turned in humanity's favor. "We've got them on the run," Dr. Shaw said, his voice full of excitement. "But we need to keep pushing. This could be our only chance." Dr. Rice nodded. "Agreed. Let's make it count." Back on the bridge, General Miller stood tall, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The Zorath were retreating, but she knew they wouldn't give up easily. There was still much to be done, and the fight was far from over. But for the first time since the battle began, the humans could see the possibility of victory. They had proven that they could stand up to the Zorath, and they weren't going to stop until they saw this mission through to the end. The Zorath had underestimated humanity before. Now they would learn that humans never back down, no matter the odds. The battle had shifted, but the war was far from over. Humanity's fleet, though battered, had managed to force the Zorath into retreat. Yet, General Miller knew that this was only a temporary victory. The Zorath, powerful and relentless, would regroup and return with more firepower. The humans had to act quickly, or this fleeting moment of success would be lost. The Hope's horizon had sustained heavy damage. The once pristine ship now bore scars from the battle. Its hull was pocked with craters, and its engines sputtered with irregular pulses. But it still flew, and that was all that mattered. Miller stood on the bridge, her eyes scanning the displays, her mind focused on the next steps. "We have a window," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The Zorath will need time to recover. If we hit them now, we can break their momentum." Lieutenant Carter, who had been watching the enemy fleet closely, spoke up. "They're regrouping, General. Their ships are clustering together, likely preparing for another assault. We need to hit them before they can organize." Miller nodded. "We'll strike fast. No hesitation. We've made a dent in their strength." Lieutenant Carter spoke from his station. "But they'll rebuild. It's only a matter of time before they come back." Miller nodded solemnly. "I know. This is only a small part of the war. We have to use this victory to fuel the next phase of the fight." The bridge hummed with activity as the crew continued to monitor the status of their fleet. The Zorath may have lost their command ship, but their warships were still formidable, and they had many more in reserve. The question wasn't if they would return. It was when. On the other side of the command room, Dr. Rice was deep in thought. "General, we've gathered some critical intelligence during the battle. It appears the Zorath are planning a large-scale counteroffensive. We might be able to strike them at a vulnerable point if we act quickly." Miller turned to face Rice. "How soon can we move?" Rice hesitated for a moment. "We'll need a few hours to analyze the data and pinpoint their weak spots. But if we act fast, we can take them by surprise." Miller's eyes narrowed. This was it. They had a chance to finish what they started. It was a gamble, but one they had no choice but to take. "Make it happen. We need to move before they can recover." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the leaders of humanity had been working tirelessly to rally the remaining forces. The Earth had been united like never before, with nations putting aside their differences for the greater good. It wasn't just about fighting for survival anymore. It was about standing for something larger. Humanity's place in the galaxy. In the command center of Earth's United Coalition, President Harris spoke to a gathering of military leaders. "This victory has shown the universe that humanity is not just a footnote in the history of the galaxy. We are a force to be reckoned with, but we need to build on this success. We can't afford to rest." General Miller's fleet was just one part of a larger growing alliance. As the war against the Zorath continued, more and more alien species began to lend their support to humanity's cause. Some were motivated by the humans' bravery, others by their desperation. But whatever the reason, humanity's influence in the galaxy was steadily increasing. Back aboard the Hope's horizon, the crew had been working tirelessly to prepare for their next move. The ship was a symbol of human perseverance, a vessel built from the same resilience that had driven humanity to this point. There were no more doubts. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. As the hours passed, Dr. Rice and her team worked around the clock to analyze the Zorath's tactics. They soon identified a vulnerable supply route, one that was crucial to the enemy's war effort. If humanity could cut it off, it would deal a devastating blow to the Zorath's ability to wage war. "This is it," Rice said, her voice brimming with urgency. "We have a clear path to disrupt their supply chain. If we hit them here, we can cripple their ability to launch a full-scale assault." General Miller stood up, her face set in determination. "Prepare the fleet. We're going in." The mission was risky, but there was no other choice. The Zorath couldn't be allowed to recover fully. The humans had to strike hard and fast. As the fleet jumped into hyperspace, the crew braced for the unknown. The uncertainty of space had always been a constant companion, but now it was accompanied by a fierce hope. The galaxy had turned its back on humanity, but humanity had never been stronger. They had found allies in unexpected places, and their will to fight had only grown stronger with every challenge they faced. As they arrived at the enemy's supply route, the first wave of attacks hit. The Zorath had been caught off guard once again. Their ships, so powerful and arrogant only days before, were now scrambling to respond. But it was too late. Humanity's fleet was already on the move, striking with precision and overwhelming force. In the midst of the chaos, General Miller stood on the bridge, watching as her fleet cut through the Zorath's defenses. The enemy was faltering. Humanity was taking back the stars, one battle at a time. The plan was simple. They would use the cover of the asteroid field on the outer edge of the system to hide the remaining ships, then launch a surprise assault. It was a risk, but they had no other choice. If they gave the Zorath time to regroup, they would be back at full strength, and the humans might not survive the next wave. "Get the fleet into position," Miller ordered. The crew moved with practiced precision, despite the exhaustion that weighed on them. They had been in battle for days, but there was no time to rest. The survival of humanity depended on what they did next. As the ships maneuvered through the asteroid field, Dr. Rice worked tirelessly in the command center, her mind focused on the final part of the plan. They had discovered that the Zorath fleet relied heavily on a central command ship, one that coordinated the movements of the entire armada. If they could take that ship out, the Zorath would fall into disarray. "Dr. Rice," came the voice of Dr. Shaw. "We've got a location on the Zorath command ship. It's heavily guarded, but if we can get a clean shot, we might be able to cripple it." Ray's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we take the shot." Back on the Hope's horizon, General Miller's pulse quickened as the fleet neared the Zorath formation. They were close, too close, and the enemy still hadn't noticed them. But the Zorath were smart. They would detect the human fleet soon enough. "Prepare for assault," Miller commanded. "All ships, lock weapons on the Zorath command ship. We take that down, and the rest will fall apart." The tension in the air was palpable. Every officer on the bridge knew what was at stake. They had no backup, no reinforcements. If this plan failed, it would be the end of the line for humanity. "Targets locked," reported Lieutenant Carter. "Ready," Dr. Rice confirmed from the lower decks. "We've got a clean line of sight." Miller's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. The moment of truth was here. Now. The human fleet erupted from the asteroid field, weapons blazing as they struck the Zorath formation with all their might. Energy blasts and missiles tore through space, hitting their marks with precision. The Zorath, caught off guard, attempted to retaliate, but the human ships were too fast, too unpredictable. The Zorath fleet began to break apart under the onslaught. And then it happened. A massive explosion lit up the dark void as the human fleet's coordinated assault hit the Zorath command ship directly. The ship shuddered, its shields flickering, before the energy core detonated in a brilliant burst of light. The Zorath flagship was no more. The remaining Zorath ships faltered. Without their command center, they were disorganized, easy targets. The human fleet moved in, picking them off one by one. It was as though the Zorath had lost their will to fight. Their ships, once so formidable, now seemed like a collection of stray vessels, drifting aimlessly as they were systematically destroyed. "Keep up the pressure," Miller shouted, her voice rising above the sounds of battle. "Don't let them regroup." But even as the humans triumphed in this moment, Miller knew that the Zorath wouldn't give up easily. They would retreat, lick their wounds, and come back with vengeance in their hearts. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Down in the lower decks, Dr. Rice wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "We did it," she said to Dr. Shaw, her voice filled with quiet pride. "We took their heart out." Shaw nodded, his face weary but triumphant. "Now we just have to make sure they don't get a second chance." Back on the bridge, Miller watched as the Zorath fleet scattered, their once proud armada crumbling under the weight of humanity's resolve. But even as the immediate danger passed, she couldn't help but wonder, what would the Zorath do now? They had just dealt a blow that would take months, if not years, to recover from. But she knew, deep down, that humanity's struggle was far from over. They had proven that they could stand up to the Zorath. But the galaxy was a big place, and humanity's place in it was still uncertain. As the fleet gathered, ready for the next move, General Miller's eyes hardened. "This isn't over," she murmured. "We've only just begun." Humanity had won a significant victory, but the war was far from over. The Zorath, though wounded, were still a force to be reckoned with. General Miller stood at the bridge of the Hope's horizon, gazing at the now dispersed remnants of the Zorath fleet, which were slowly drifting through space like broken pieces of a shattered puzzle. The battle had been fierce, but the tide had finally turned. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. But in the distance, Miller knew the Zorath would regroup and try again. Though the galaxy had turned its back on the Therans, humanity had decided to stand with them. The road ahead would not be easy, but humanity was ready for whatever challenges awaited them in the stars. As humanity's decision to help the Therans spread across Earth, the reaction was mixed. Some were filled with pride, knowing that their planet, so young in the grand scheme of the galaxy, had made the choice to act when others stood by and did nothing. Others, however, were uncertain and worried. The political leaders of Earth debated endlessly, torn between the ideals of doing what was right and the realities of how much they were willing to risk. In the heart of Earth's government, a high-level meeting was called. Representatives from all walks of life gathered in the Grand Council chambers. The air was thick with tension. Scientists, military leaders, diplomats, and even ordinary citizens who had somehow found their way into the debate filled the room. They knew this decision would shape the future of their species, whether it would be remembered as the moment humanity rose to greatness, or as the moment they foolishly walked into the unknown and faced disaster. General Alexandra Miller, a respected leader of Earth's military forces, was one of the first to speak. "We cannot ignore the Therans. They've asked for help. If we turn away now, we're no better than the other galactic races who abandoned them. This is our chance to show the galaxy that humanity is different." Her words rang out, echoing in the minds of many. Earth's military was not the most advanced in the galaxy. Their ships were smaller and less powerful than the fleets of the established galactic empires. But what they lacked in technology, they made up for with ingenuity, resourcefulness, and an unwavering spirit. The general argued that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to adapt to any situation, no matter how dire. But not everyone was convinced. Ambassador Victor Hale, a diplomat known for his cautious approach, raised a concern. "We don't know the full extent of the Zorath's power. The Therans may be right to ask for help, but can we afford to fight an empire so much stronger than us? What if this ends in disaster? We could lose everything." The room fell silent. The thought of challenging the Zorath Empire was daunting. The Zorath's ships were enormous, their weapons powerful enough to wipe out entire fleets with ease, and the Scytherans, though highly intelligent and peaceful, did not have the military might to withstand such an invasion on their own. But there was something in Hale's voice, a note of uncertainty that many shared, yet it didn't stop a small but growing number of voices from speaking up. A young scientist, Dr. Emily Reyes, who had been quietly observing the discussions, finally stood. She had been part of the team that received this Theron's transmission. She had seen their plea firsthand, and it had moved her deeply. "We can't just sit here and do nothing," she said, her voice steady and firm. "We may not have the most powerful ships, but we have something the others don't: human ingenuity. Our ability to think outside the box, to solve problems in ways no one expects. That's what got us to this point. It's what got us into space in the first place. It's what will keep us alive when everything else seems impossible." Her words hit home. The room buzzed with the energy of new thoughts. The human race had always been able to accomplish things against all odds. They had survived, thrived, and even innovated in the harshest of environments. From the early days of exploring their own planet to reaching out into the stars, humanity's spirit was unbreakable. President Lena Matthews, a woman known for her wisdom and strong sense of justice, stood to address the council. "We cannot turn our backs on the Scytherans. Their world is in danger, and if we allow that to happen, it sends a message to the rest of the galaxy that humanity is not willing to act when others are in need. If we want to prove that humanity belongs among the stars, then we must prove it now." The decision was made. Despite the uncertainty, despite the risks, humanity would intervene. The human fleet, though smaller and less advanced than those of the other galactic powers, would be sent to this Theron's aid. Earth would show the galaxy that they stood for something more than just survival. They stood for what was right. As the news spread, the people of Earth felt a sense of unity like never before. Ordinary citizens from every corner of the world rallied together to support the mission. They donated resources, sent messages of encouragement, and stood behind their leaders, knowing that their fate was now tied to something much bigger than themselves. The Zorath fleet loomed large in the distance. Their ships were massive, like giant war machines, with sharp edges and dark, imposing hulls. They were currently engaged in a bombardment, their weapons lighting up the sky with deadly force. It was clear they had no intention of giving up this Theron homeworld without a fight. "Shields up," an officer called out, and the human ships activated their protective barriers. Though the shields weren't as strong as the Zorath's, they would provide some defense. "Target their flanks," Miller ordered. "We need to catch them off guard." The human fleet moved into position, their ships weaving through space with agility and speed. It was a tactic designed to confuse and evade. The Zorath were strong, but they relied on their size and overwhelming firepower. The humans had no such luxury. They needed to outmaneuver and strike quickly, using their smaller ships to avoid direct confrontation. As the human ships closed in, the first shots were fired. The Zorath ships unleashed a barrage of laser beams and energy pulses, but the human ships dodged and countered with their own weapons. The humans' weapons weren't as powerful, but they were precise, targeting weak points on the Zorath vessels. One of the smaller Zorath ships exploded in a fiery burst as a human ship hit a critical power node. It wasn't much, but it was a small victory, one that proved the humans could hold their ground. "Keep moving," General Miller shouted over the comms. "We need to keep the pressure on them." The battle had begun. It was chaotic, a blur of lights and explosions, but the humans fought with a determination that even the Zorath couldn't ignore. The enemy was bigger, stronger, but humanity had something they didn't: heart. They fought not just for survival, but for the Scytherans, for the belief that they could make a difference in the galaxy. And they weren't about to give up now. The battle in space was raging, with every moment feeling like it could be the last. The human fleet moved in swift formations, dodging laser blasts and retaliating with well-aimed shots at the Zorath ships. General Alexandra Miller's strategy was simple yet effective. Agility over strength. The Zorath ships were larger and more powerful, but the human fleet used their size to their advantage, darting around the massive warships with incredible speed. It wasn't easy, but it was working, at least for the moment. The sounds of explosions echoed through the comms, and the view screens displayed flashes of light as ships from both sides collided. But despite their best efforts, the humans were starting to feel the pressure. The Zorath ships were relentless, pouring fire into the human fleet with every passing second. One of the smaller human vessels, the Starfire, was hit directly by a Zorath blast, sending it spinning uncontrollably. Crew members on the ship fought to regain control, but it was clear that the ship was heavily damaged. On the bridge of the Hope's horizon, General Miller's grip tightened around the armrest of her chair. The crew worked in perfect synchrony, adjusting their course and firing their weapons with precision. "We need to push harder," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We can't afford to fall back." "General, we've got a problem," one of the officers shouted. "The Zorath are sending reinforcements. More ships are coming in from the outer rim." Miller's heart sank. They had already been facing overwhelming odds, but now it seemed the battle was about to tip completely in the Zorath's favor. It was a tactic the enemy had likely planned all along, to overwhelm the human fleet with sheer numbers. The humans had been holding their own for a while, but this new wave of Zorath ships might be too much for them. As if on cue, a loud alarm blared on the bridge. A Zorath dreadnought had appeared, massive and imposing, with energy shields that pulsed like a living thing. The Hope's horizon trembled under the strain of its proximity, and the crew watched helplessly as the enormous ship began charging its weapons. "This is it," Miller muttered, realizing that their strategy had reached its breaking point. "We need a plan. Now." Dr. Emily Reyes, who had been monitoring the battle from the science station, suddenly spoke up. "General, I think I have an idea. We've been fighting them head-on, but what if we used their size against them?" Miller turned to the scientist, her brow furrowing. "What are you suggesting?" "Every Zorath ship relies on its energy shield to protect it," Dr. Rice explained, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "If we can overload the shield's energy grid, even for a split second, it might disable their defenses long enough for us to strike." The idea was risky, and the chances of success were slim. But they didn't have a choice. "Do it," Miller said, nodding toward Reyes. "Give us the opening we need."